In the wake of horrible family fights, short of leaving my father, my mother would do something that shook the foundations of my childhood. She would step into our living room and, spurred by rage, spite, and last-ditch efforts to restore order in her life, she would single-handedly move all the furniture around. The large sofa was instantly relegated to the place held by an imposing bookcase. The bookcase would be shunted over to the corner that belonged to an unassuming little cabinet, now demoted to a corner where, like it or not, it sat in the dark under the terrified gaze of two leather armchairs squatting meekly in the maelstrom. To the outside world, my mother was furiously rearranging furniture. To those who knew her, she was simply trying to put a new face on her life. Since she couldn't change much of anything in the end, perhaps she was just trying to give her life a new look. It was madness, but it taught me that if changing the layout of your problems doesn't necessarily solve them, it does make living with them easier. It also taught me one thing, that what came in the wake of any change, however terrifying the change, couldn't have been more thrilling. Like my mother, memoirists will always play fast and loose with facts. Unable to erase the ugliest moments of their past, the best they can do is to shift them around. Everyone has reasons for altering the past. We may want to embellish or gloss over the past, or we may want to repress it, or to change it just enough so as to be able to live with it. Some, in an effort to give their lives a narrative, a shape, a logic, end up altering not the facts they've known, but their layout, exactly what my mother had done. Life as a Rubik's Cube. Eventually, like someone jimmying the tumblers on a lock, she might spin things just right and find a sequence that made sense to her. She never did. There are many things about my life that I wish had been different and that I still find difficult to live down. As a memoirist, I may claim to write the better to remember things, but I know better. I write to sweep them away. Don't bother me about the past, I'll say. It's out in paperback now, as if paperback was synonymous with truth. Writing the past is never a neutral act. Writing always asks the past to justify itself, to give its reasons, provided we can live with those reasons. Objectivity is the most unlikely character called to the witness stand. What we want instead is a sequence of cause and effects that make good enough sense on paper, not in a court of law. What we want is a narrative, not a log, a tale, not a trial. This is why most people write their past using the conventions not of history, but of storytelling. That is, fiction. It's the revenge against facts that won't go away. Writing alters, reshuffles, intrudes on everything. As small a thing as a shifty adverb or an adjective with some attitude, or just a spriggly little comma is enough to reconfigure the past. And maybe this is why we write. We want the second chance, another go. We want the other version of our life, the one that thrills us, the one that happened to the people we really are, not to those we happened to be once. We don't want the past. We want the past made more credible to the people we have become today. We want the past made retrospectively luminous. And yet, after we've moved the furniture around and made peace with our little cheats, the question that has always baffled me and that no one asks is, what happens to that past after the writing process is done with it? After all our epiphanies have cast the radiance? You might as well ask, what happens to Marcel Proust once he's done writing Swans Way? Or better yet, what happens when he dips a Madeleine in tea long after he's written about Madeleines and the memories they trigger? Can Marcel Proust eat a Madeleine after writing about it and still expect the miracle of remembrance to occur now that writing has crystallized, elaborated, and basically taken over the experience? And there's another thing. Proust had originally written about dunking a piece of toasted bread in tea, not about a madeleine. Once he swapped bread for madeleines, he was creating a surrogate reality, which now inhabited and had indeed grafted itself onto his memory, ultimately displacing and overshadowing the original experience with toasted bread. In other words, if there is a primal layout to a living room, what happens to it once the writing process has shifted things around? And here is a strange fact. Within a few weeks after my mother had rearranged the furniture, it was no longer possible to recall the previous layout of our living room. Similarly, after no more than a year or so, we seldom recall what corner store was in the place now occupied by Starbucks. Ask us to recall a store that was there 2 generations of stores earlier, and we won't know whether we're remembering, trying to remember, or just making things up. To use computer language, the later version was basically overwritten. The later version has basically overwritten the earlier one. After publishing Swans Way, Marcel Proust may know that he never dunked a single madeleine in a cup of herbal tea, but if asked to visualize the dunking of a baked something in herbal tea, he will most likely not be able to see anything but madeleines. Writing not only plays fast and loose with the past, it hijacks the past, which may be why we put the past to paper. We want it hijacked. In 1990, I published an account of a walk with my brother on our last night in Alexandria, out of Egypt. 4 years later, in my memoir, Out of Egypt, 1994, I removed my brother from the scene, basically killed him off, and instead described myself taking that same walk by myself. Today, there are 2 competing versions of that walk floating on the web. When I returned to Egypt in 1995, I walked along the same stretch of street to test whether I could still remember walking there alone or with my brother. And suddenly it occurred to me that with or without my brother, perhaps I had made the whole thing up. And if I couldn't tell for certain that I had, it's because the 2 published versions stood in the way of what had actually happened on my last night in Alexandria. Today, I remember the walk I took alone, but only because I spent more time writing it. Ask me which is truer of the 2, I'd say most likely the one I took with my brother. Ask me which is the truest, and I'll probably admit making it up. Ask me again, and I won't remember. After I write a scene from memory, I can no longer recall the original scene. I'll remember the walk in Alexandria only as it's been transcribed, not as it happened, if that is, it ever happened. There are several versions of the past out there, all of which are at once real and not real, which is another way of saying not quite real or unreal. And here we enter the spectral realm of quantum mnemonics. There is no past, there are just versions of the past. Proving one version settles absolutely nothing, because proving another true is equally possible. If I were to rewrite the scene one more time, this new version would overwrite the previous ones and in time become just another version among others. The Russian memoirist Alexander Herzen said somewhere that he had always been reluctant to commit his past to paper for fear of permanently altering the past in his mind. He was right. Paper was made to capture what came before it, but also to erase it. Words radiate something that is better, more eloquent, and more durable than real, and therefore more real than real, because under their stewardship, it is not truth we're after. What we want to countenance instead is something that was always there, but that we weren't seeing and are only now, with the genius of retrospection, finally seeing as it should have occurred and might have occurred, and to push things somewhat, is still likely to occur. In writing, the difference between the no more and the not yet is totally negligible. We can have many pasts, just as we can have several identities at the same time, or be in two places without being in either. In hobbling, flat-footed, day-to-day life, the answer is always going to be either yes or no, black or white, plus or minus, past or present, male or female. Whereas some of us can be in 2, 3, 4 places at one and the same time. For every life we live, there are at least 8 others we've gotten close to but may never get to know. Maybe there is no true life or false life, no remembered or imagined itinerary, no projected or revisited moments, no worthy or wasted days, just as there is no such thing as mask or face, truth or lie, right or wrong answers. Quantum theory itself can be both right and wrong. Can something be and not be at the same time? There is no answer. The only possible out is the one my mother taught me, that there is a pleasure, something so unspeakably thrilling in uncovering the other version of our life, that given a few days, a few weeks, a few years, and sure enough, this version will be the only one worth living and therefore worth remembering. Thank you.